Young hunter Joey led his hunting team and through relentless effort successfully hunted a massive male moose. This gave them at least 700 to 800 pounds of deer meat, enough to keep several families safe through the winter. Also, he found a new hunting ground for the post-disaster Tanana town. Such achievements made Joey feel proud. As night fell, once the moose was processed, traveling several kilometers by boat back home was too risky. So they would camp in the uninhabited wilderness tonight. After dark, they set up a simple tent with a tarp. The hunters would huddle together and make do for the night. Before going to sleep, they would cook the deer heart and then eat it together. This is a tradition left by their ancestors. When a hunter is successful, they share the heart of the prey with everyone. For Joey, this was a matter of great pride. Old hunters often taught them to respect their prey and make the most of it, not wasting any edible part. However, personally, they felt that apart from the meat and heart, other parts were still wasted. After eating their fill, the hunters couldn't rest easy because the smell of the deer meat would attract all the hungry carnivores nearby. For their safety, they would take turns keeping watch until daylight. When the sun rose again, the hunters began a new day's work. They loaded all the deer meat onto the boat and happily returned to Tanana. When Joey got home, his parents and grandmother came to celebrate with him. At the same time, they also processed the deer meat, cutting it into small pieces, wrapping it in cling film, and storing it in the freezer. Old Stan, who was excited, introduced everyone to the meat grinder he assembled from old parts. Only, he wondered if eating too much of the sausage made from the deer meat would cause nosebleeds. Old Stan hadn't participated in the deer hunt because he had his own tasks. The fire had burned over 3 million acres of land, including a public hunting cabin and the wooden house he had lived in for 11 years, all within this area. Now, he had to follow his trapping line to the Tusitna River to see if he could find a glimmer of hope. This disaster was a deadly blow for these trappers. Although the forest would heal itself, it would take time. For those who never saved money, what to live on during this period was a big problem. Nothing is absolute in life. If lucky, the fire might have spared his trapping line, which would be incredibly fortunate. But reality was much worse than he imagined. The trapping line that once fed his family was now a burnt wasteland. The traps on the ground, after being ravaged by the fire, had lost their rigidity and turned into scrap metal. A wave of pessimism instantly surged in Old Stan's heart, but he couldn't give up yet. If the hunting cabin could still survive, rising again would just be a matter of time. His first stop today was a public hunting cabin 20 kilometers from Tanana. Pushing forward another 40 kilometers was the wooden house he had lived in for 11 years. When he drove up to the first place, what he saw was despair. The small refuge cabin had been leveled by the fire, leaving only some unusable metal items. Now, the only hope was the house by the Tusitna River. If the situation was the same there, then Old Stan would have to find another way to make a living. The fire had spread all the way to near the Tusitna River, and the original road had also been destroyed by the fire. Now, he can only move forward on foot, just like when he first arrived in Alaska. As he gets closer to his destination, things finally start to turn around. The traps in the area haven't been affected by the big fire and are still usable, but his good luck seems to be fleeting. As he continues forward, the spruce forest ahead is still a charred mess. From what he can see now, the old cabin might have been completely flattened. It might be his relentless effort that has moved nature. When he gets near the Tosi River, a miracle happens. The cabin hidden in the spruce forest is intact, including the trap lines around the house, which have also been safely preserved. Old Stan is overjoyed. Such good fortune is absolutely like having smoke rise from the ancestral grave. Although this year is bound to be tough, the cabin has sparked new hope in him. Crows are incredibly clever. To get food, they sometimes act as guides for hunters. The wilderness of Alaska is like a hunter's market. They hunt whatever meat they want without spending a dime. Of course, all this must be done within the rules. The terrible fire in Tanana town happened during the precious moose season. This disaster not only delayed the hunters' valuable hunting time, but also destroyed their main hunting grounds. To get moose meat for the winter, Charlie and his son Bob need to find a new hunting ground. Their hunt has turned into a desperate search. Moose season will end in 5 days, adding to the pressure on Charlie and his son. Today, they're heading to a remote area 80 kilometers away to see if they can find a wetland forest that hasn't been destroyed. But the terrible fire spared no mercy, even burning these remote areas to a crisp. Although the forests are charred, the areas near the lakes are unharmed. Wetlands are moose's favorite spots, so they might find them here. The father and son decide to take a chance. To the keen eyes of a moose, hunters in a burnt forest will be particularly conspicuous. So, they need to find a way to hide themselves. After discussing, the father and son decide to build a hunting lodge in the air between a few trees. Being up high not only gives them a bird's eye view of the hunting ground, but also helps them stay well hidden. Nearby, there happens to be an abandoned cabin. The wood from this cabin can save them a lot of time. First, they use logs to set up a frame, then lay the dismantled planks as the floor. They fix several thinner logs up high and cover them with a tarpaulin to finish the aerial hunting lodge. Charlie starts mimicking moose calls to attract the animals, while Bob uses binoculars to scan the area. Their survival depends on these animals, so they must succeed no matter what. A day quickly passes, and the next morning, the father and son get up early to continue their search. With only 4 days left in moose season, Charlie is very anxious. He believes that such a good spot must have the game he's after. Suddenly, the wind picks up. If it's downwind, it helps carry the moose calls further, but upwind has the opposite effect. They're currently in an upwind position, so they need to change their strategy. The father and son take a canoe to cross the small lake, mimicking moose calls along the way, hoping to lure the game to their hunting lodge. Charlie learned most of his hunting skills from the older generation. He then spent a lot of time perfecting them, making various improvements. Now, he's one of the top hunters in town. It's moose mating season. Charlie tries different calls to catch their attention. After crossing the lake, they quickly head back to their hunting lodge to wait for a moose to appear. Despite all their efforts, they see no sign of a moose. Just as they're losing patience, a moose finally appears in their sight. But it's too far away, beyond their effective shooting range. They quickly climb down from the lodge and chase after the target. By the time they reach the spot, the moose has vanished without a trace. Seeing a moose is one thing, but catching it is another. Time flies, and 2 more days pass. Now, there are only 36 hours left in moose season. Charlie and his son leave the lodge and start searching again. This might be the first time Charlie feels this worried about coming home empty-handed. The forest fire already messed up fishing season. If they don't get any moose meat this season, Charlie doesn't know how those depending on him will survive the tough winter. Just then, a crow catches Charlie's attention. Crows are incredibly smart. Sometimes, they can lead hunters to their prey because they know that the discarded blood, fat, and meat will feed them for a while. It sounds a bit far-fetched, but Charlie completely believes it. He and his son follow the path taken by the crow. Sure enough, they find a trail used by a moose, along with fresh footprints. This boosts their confidence. They keep their voices low and slowly move forward. They finally spot their target. This could be their last chance this season, so failure is not an option. To ensure a fatal shot, they need to get as close as possible. After the sound of a gunshot, the moose falls into the water. Thanks to their relentless effort and the crow's guidance, they succeed. This catch will provide Charlie with at least 500 or 600 pounds of deer meat. They're thrilled, but the real work has just begun. To prevent the meat from spoiling, they need to quickly pull it out of the water. Using a winch, they manage to drag it ashore. Cutting up the moose will take at least 2 hours. By the time they finish, it's already dark. Looks like they'll have to spend the night outdoors. They bring the meat back to their temporary camp and need to think about how to preserve it. They build a simple rack and hang the meat on it. This keeps the meat off the ground, reducing bacterial spread. The airflow helps form a dry film on the surface of the meat, which slows down spoilage. Leaving the meat out in the open wilderness is a big temptation for carnivorous animals. Father and son take turns watching over the hard-earned food. The night passes without incident. At dawn, they return to Tanana. Charlie plans to give a lot of the deer meat he hunted to the elderly who can't hunt and to his friends. This is what makes him most proud. He has always seen taking care of the whole village as his responsibility. Seeing everyone's appreciative looks makes all his previous efforts feel very meaningful. What do you think of Charlie after hearing this? 2 small boats are loaded with all their belongings. Chris, a native Alaskan, and his wife Jessie are fleeing the city to return to the wilderness. They are heading to a homestead on the Kuskokwim River where Chris's father left him a small cabin. Before he was 10, he lived there with his parents, hunting and fishing, living off the land. After living in Fairbanks for 30 years, he and his wife decide to give up city life. They sold their freight company and their house. Finally, they packed everything into these 2 canoes, determined to return to the wildlife in Alaska. The Kuskokwim River is small, but has very dangerous rapids. Years ago, a friend of Chris's father tragically died in this river. Their journey is full of dangers, and several times they almost get swallowed by the river. However, through relentless effort, they safely reach their destination. Seeing the cabin left by his father, not destroyed by the wildfire, almost brings them to tears. They enter the cabin and light the oil lamp. Their real wilderness life begins. The couple sees this life as their dream, but leaving their comfort zone for a place where everything must be done by hand is challenging. Whether they can endure it remains to be seen. With winter approaching, they need to prepare food, water, and heating materials in advance. Water is the easiest to solve as there's a river right in front of their door, although it's very murky and needs to be boiled and settled before it can barely be drinkable. Heating materials can wait, but food is the main issue now. Their supplies are limited, and they have grains but no meat. There's nowhere to buy meat here. The only way to get it is to hunt in the forest. Chris walks around their house for a long time and finally manages to hunt a squirrel. Their first meal in the wild isn't much, but at least it has meat. Hunting squirrels is just their first attempt at surviving in the wilderness. If they want to live here long term, they need to hunt bigger game, like a moose, which could last a whole winter. Hunting a moose requires preparation, especially since storing so much meat is a big problem. Before hunting, they need to build a smokehouse, which is actually quite simple. It's just building a small hut, putting the meat inside, and using fire and smoke to dry the meat and prevent bacteria from growing. But it's not as easy as it sounds, especially since Chris has a hot temper and little patience. The couple spends a day building this rather ugly smokehouse. Thinking back to the days in the city when meals were served without any effort makes them nostalgic. The next day, they travel 16 kilometers to the area where Chris learned to hunt as a child. He's more familiar with this area, so there's a better chance of success. They haven't found a moose yet, but they discover bear droppings. The 2 of them became tense in an instant. Normally, they would have bailed immediately, but with only 36 hours left in moose season, they had no choice. They just had to keep looking for moose. After searching for a long time without success, they decided to split up. This way, the chances of encountering a moose would double. Chris tried to mimic the call of a moose, hoping to lure them in. Then Jessie would take it down. Just then, a gunshot rang out, followed by Jessie's shout. In this situation, she either saw a moose or bumped into a black bear. Chris hurried over. When he got there, he was stunned. Turns out, Jessie had bagged a fat bird. This cutie could only feed them for 1 meal. In the effort to hunt it, the noise scared away all the nearby animals. This was truly a case of losing the watermelon for the sesame seed. Until the very last minute of moose season, this couple hadn't managed to hunt a moose. They didn't even get a chance to see one. Winter without food left Chris in a panic, because in such places, you can really starve to death. Right now, they had no other options. They just had to go home and figure things out from there. How long do you think this wilderness couple can last here? This is a harpoon, also known as a fish spear. Each tip has barbs. When it pierces a fish, these barbs grip the fish tightly, making it impossible for the fish to escape or fall off. Hunter Charlie and his son Bob are using this almost forgotten hunting method to catch fish for their mother to survive the winter. His hometown is a little village called Blue Part. As a son, he prepares winter supplies for his mother every year. This year, his mother's fishing water wheel unexpectedly broke down. As a result, Charlie and his son need to go back home first to fix the water wheel. After all, this device can catch fish automatically and saves a lot of effort. The damaged fishing water wheel has now been pushed ashore by driftwood in the Yukon River. The father and son are trying to drag it back into the water and then assess whether it's worth repairing. Their time is pressing because once the river freezes, the fishing season will be completely over. After clearing the obstacles around the water wheel, Charlie plans to use his boat to drag this several-ton water wheel into the river. But because the water wheel is too heavy, when Charlie gave it full power, the towing rope snapped in two. Charlie and his son won't give up just like that. Years of wilderness living have made them incredibly tough. Using a jack and a crowbar, the automatic fishing water wheel was finally dragged back into the Yukon River. Unfortunately, the water wheel was severely damaged, and there was no possibility of repairing it soon. The most urgent thing now is to try to catch 100 or so pounds of fish for his old mother to survive the winter. Earlier, Alaskans didn't have fishing water wheels. The natives used harpoons to fish. Now, Charlie wants to revive this traditional fishing technique. He recalls the last time he fished this way was 20 years ago. He's not sure if he can still manage it now. Actually, this method is very difficult to catch fish with. But time is of the essence, so they just have to go for it. The father and son come to the Yukon River to find their target for today. The fish they're looking for is called the Alaska whitefish, also known as the humpback fresh. These fish live in the Yukon River all year round, but are hard to find. Plus, with eagles in the sky now, the clever whitefish are definitely hiding in deep waters. Charlie stayed in the water half the day and didn't even see a fish fry. They had to leave first. Father and son will wait until nighttime to come back and try again. To get some fish for their mother, they can stay out all night whenever the night is dark and windy. These fish come to the shallower waters to feed under cover of darkness. The hunters line up in a row, driving the fish into a smaller area while trying to catch them. After some effort, Charlie catches the first fish. After that, the others couldn't stop. As their spears kept plunging into the water, they caught a lot of fish. Each bucket could hold 10 to 20 pounds of whitefish. To reach their goal of 100 or so pounds, they needed to fill at least 5 buckets. They were lucky. They found a large school of fish. In less than an hour, they had already caught 30 to 40 pounds. To reach their goal, they would continue through the night until they met their target, all the way until the next morning. Charlie and his son returned to their mom's place with their catch. After a whole night's effort, they exceeded their goal. Seeing the satisfied smile on their mother's face, all the hardship was worth it. After fishing all night, they were both tired and hungry and desperately needed a good meal. Supporting the elderly is a duty and responsibility everyone should fulfill, and in this respect, parents are the best teachers for their children. Charlie's example is something Bob saw and took to heart. No wonder people say, "The way you treat your parents now is how your children will treat you later." What do you think about this view? A young couple in the wilderness spent a huge effort and finally caught a small beaver. But its meat would only last them 2 days. After that, they would be hungry again. With 2 months left until Alaska's polar night, they must gather enough food before it arrives. Life in the wilderness is exhausting. Every day, there's endless work. Chopping wood, trapping, hunting, and when they have a moment, improving their homestead. The key issue is trapping and hunting. Tasks that are supposed to provide food often end in failure. The pressure for food has brought the couple to a breaking point. Without a stable food source, they have to cut their usual rations. Hungry and cold, heaven quickly turns into hell. Chris has searched this area thoroughly. There's only one kind of prey left to catch. During moose season, he found a place that looked like a bear's den. Facing the prospect of running out of food, he had a crazy idea: to raid the bear's den. But everyone knows, Hunting a bear could very likely cost him his life. Jesse's friend's husband died at the paws of a bear while hunting. Although she was scared, she couldn't withstand Chris's persistent pleading, plus the looming reality of starvation. She finally agreed to her husband's suggestion. At this point, they were really out of options. This might also be their last resort. So, they walked into the wilderness and approached the bear's den. The entrance was large, likely not a small bear. Naturally, the couple was thrilled about the potential food for the winter. But for the bear hibernating inside, they were just walking into dinner. Bear caves usually have turns inside, so you can't see the back from the outside. One of them had to crawl inside to see what was really there. Chris volunteered to stay outside to kill the bear because, simply put, Jesse might not have the strength to pull him out in time if things went south. By now, Jesse was probably freaking out. This wasn't bear hunting. It looked more like feeding the bears and maybe even getting a new wife legally. But after thinking it over, this seemed like the only viable option. She decided to take the risk. The cave was deep. She crawled in halfway, but still couldn't see anything. It was only when she was fully inside that she realized it was completely empty. Their hopes were dashed again. Back to square one, their only option now was to find a new bear cave. Bears often abandon old dens and dig new ones nearby. After some searching, following tracks on the ground, they actually found a new den. Frost around the entrance showed something breathing was inside. But the den was too deep. They couldn't see anything. Now, it was up to Jessie to crawl into the bear cave again. Terrified, heart in her throat, she still chose to trust her husband. I was thinking, if this could be solved with just a match, why make your wife risk it all? When Jessie was fully inside the cave, she suddenly started yelling. In the nick of time, Chris quickly pulled her out. A big bear poked its head out right after her. Since they're slow during hibernation, Chris took it down with one bullet. Looking at Jessie, now in tears, she had nearly come face to face with the bear. A split second slower, and she might have died under its paw. Risking their lives, they finally got the food they needed to safely get through the winter. Would you let your partner crawl into a bear den if you were hunting bears? Chris was cutting a tree into small pieces, wood for heating during the winter. Real wilderness living is much harder than this young couple had imagined. Despite their efforts to keep up, they still haven't solved their basic food issues. As for heating, they quickly used up all the dry wood nearby. Eventually, they had to spend 6 hours a day going far away to find new wood. And this time should have been spent looking for food. They need to find a quicker, more efficient way to ease their current awkward situation. To survive here, they must collect a month's worth of firewood in just a few days, and use the remaining time. Hunting or trapping seemed like good options. But as things stood, it seemed nearly impossible. Just when the couple felt hopeless, Chris remembered his dad had left a snowmobile here. If they could get it working, their problem would be solved. Looking at the beat-up motorcycle, Jessie was clearly disappointed. There were no repair shops here, no parts for sale. In theory, it was just a pile of junk. But Chris had been tinkering with mechanics since he was 16. If he could fix it with the limited resources, that would be great. He used an old clothesline and a stick to make a starter rope. Then, he found some old wire to connect the spark plug and ignition. After pulling it 981 times, the engine finally started. Though it only worked for a few seconds, it proved the engine was good. Restoring all the parts, the snowmobile was back in working condition. With the machine's help, they could gather a week's worth of firewood in one day. No more worrying about heating problems. Since arriving in the wilderness, various challenges had really troubled them. Chris was okay, having some wilderness experience, but Jessie was clearly disheartened. Now that the heating wood was sorted, Chris wanted to cheer up his wife. Bathing was one of the hardest problems to solve in these conditions. It wasn't a lack of water. The main issue was the cold. The space inside was too small, and outside, you'd probably freeze halfway through. To solve this, Chris decided to build a bathroom for his wife. He planned to use 3 trees in front of the door as supports. then seal it with his father's leftover wood planks. Inside, there would be a wood-burning stove and a bathtub. They could take baths. Material scarcity made actual construction not so easy. He used everything he could find. Even one of the walls was made directly from an old window. You could see everything inside the bathroom from outside, but no need to worry about peeping. Only wolves and the like lived here, and they wouldn't last. Jessie was very happy. This was the first time she felt at home here. Wilderness life might not be Chris's strong suit, but making his wife happy, he was top-notch. After the romance, they had to face a reality: food. Chris decided to try his luck tomorrow at the place where he used to catch beavers as a child. Chris and Jessie, the wilderness couple, finally had time to look for food. There was a big lake nearby, where Chris's father used to take him beaver trapping. Now, he wanted to revive these old skills to catch life-saving food for himself and his wife. When they first arrived, the abundance of resources made him think hunting would be easy. After being slapped by reality 250 times, he finally realized that true wilderness life isn't for everyone. Since arriving here, Chris has lost over 72 pounds. If they don't find a stable food source soon, it'll be a devastating blow for them. In 2 months, Alaska will enter the polar night period. By then, if they still don't have food, the couple might starve or be forced out. Chris hasn't trapped beavers for over 20 years. Before this, he never thought he'd rely on beaver meat to survive. Although life is tough, they have never thought of giving up. Just then, a 10-meter deep ravine blocked their path. He remembers, 20 years ago, this was just a small stream. It's surprising how years of erosion turned it into this. Right now, the snowmobile can't get across. They have to find a new path. After some exploration, they find that the eroded riverbed extends several kilometers in both directions. Looking for a new route could take days, but they can't afford that now. Chris thinks of a new plan. He wants to build a temporary bridge over the ravine using several trees lined up. This crazy idea seems unrealistic to Jessie, but to get meat, they have to try. Chris plans to cut down 2 large trees and place them on either side of the path, filling the middle with smaller trees. A large tree can be 30 meters tall and weigh 1 to 2 tons, so it must fall precisely. It's nearly impossible to move it by human strength alone. The first tree falls exactly where they planned. Chris immediately starts to clear the branches, but because it's slippery, he almost falls into the ravine. Luckily, Jessie saves his life, or the wilderness would have one more lost soul. The first 3 trees fall quite precisely, but the 4th tree falls about 6 meters off the intended track. Now they have no choice but to slowly pull it into place with a winch. After both of their efforts, the frame of the bridge is finally built. They fill the gaps between the trees with branches and cover it with snow, getting it ready. Chris begins the first crossing. This looks extremely risky. One slip and both the man and the vehicle could be gone. There's a saying, the bolder the person, the greater the yield. Eventually, they cross the bridge safely. After a long journey, the couple finally reaches the place where Chris used to trap beavers as a kid. They find a beaver lodge. After clearing the snow, they see bubbles on the ice surface, indicating there are live animals underneath. The bubbles are from their breathing. Cut through the ice with a chainsaw, then use birch branches as bait. Stick them into the mud at the bottom of the water. Set up 3 to 4 noose traps around the bait. Finally, cover the hole with spruce branches. Now, just wait for tomorrow to check the traps. They need to set up several more of these traps. That way, they can have a steady supply of food. Early the next day, the couple excitedly returned to their hunting spot. It's been a while since they've had meat. If today is successful, it'll really improve their lives. In the first trap, they caught the first beaver of the season. It's not big, but it's enough for the couple to eat for 2 days. They were hoping to catch at least 3 beavers each time they checked the traps. But reality is harsh. Today, they only caught 1 small beaver. This was a big blow to them. If this keeps up, starving to death is a real possibility. So they came up with an even crazier idea. Instead of trapping small game, why not go for something bigger? Now, only large prey can help this wilderness couple through the tough winter. In the wilds of Alaska, a rare large-scale wildfire burned over 3 million acres of forest. It also destroyed Hunter Stan's hunting cabin. This cabin is located 20 kilometers north of Tanana town, right on his trapping line. During the deadly winter, nearby hunters rely on it for shelter from the harsh weather. So, before the trapping season starts, Stan has to rebuild the hunting cabin. To get the job done, he needs a heavy-duty truck to transport the building materials. The Moors in town are the only ones who have such a truck. So Stan approached Patek. When he heard it was to help rebuild the hunting cabins for everyone, Patek gladly agreed to help out. Stan got the truck. But this 30-year-old clunker has clocked 270,000 kilometers. Plus, it's a van, which isn't really suitable for hauling large timber. The only good thing about it is it has a powerful engine. To make this truck able to haul timber, Stan called his son Joey. Father and son will work together. They're going to remove the container and the tires. They'll replace them with an open cargo bed and large off-road mountain tires.